All right, so the Arctic Liquid Freezer 3 Pro comes in this really nice black box compared to the white one on the non-pro version. And of course, we have the white, and I love the fact that they always include that MX6, which is awesome, and they're giving you a nice 6-year warranty. Now, right out the box, all 3 fans are already attached for you, and they're also pre-connected as well, which makes it very convenient for those that are going to do a top mount. But as you know, we will be doing a side mount. Here's the actual pump with a cable attached. This is going to be the addressable RGB to control the RGB elements of the VRM fan cover here. Now, I am noticing here that this cover has an additional silver trim that adds a really nice premium touch, but overall, it's pretty much the same as the non-pro version. You have the same magnetic cover, which is pretty nice and very convenient to do. And one of the things that's improved on the pro version is the fact that these fans now feature 7 blades instead of the 5 on the previous non-pro version. So these should have better performance, higher static pressure, and airflow. So I'm definitely going to be using these fans behind the radiator to create that nice push-pull configuration. Now, as for accessories, we're going to have the AMD kit here, which we are definitely going to use for the 9950X3D. We also get the bracket for the Intel processors as well. For connectors, you're getting 2 separate options. You have your standard all-in-one connector here, which will control the speeds of your fans, your VRM, and the pump. Or you can use the 3-in-1 cable, which is the one that I'm personally going to use, since I'll be able to individually control the fans, the pump, and the VRM fan, which I think is more convenient. But if you want to make it very simple, then this is perfectly fine as well. You get 0.8 grams of their awesome MX6 thermal paste, and this should be enough for about 2 to 3 applications. And also, they're giving you case fan screws, and they're giving you the screw that you use to attach the actual radiator to a bracket. For those of you guys that want to top mount your AIO, the way the fans are positioned are basically perfect for top mounting it, since these fans are set to exhaust, so that will basically exhaust air out on top of your case. But for those of you guys that want to do a side mount, you can definitely do that with this radiator. Just keep in mind that this is very, very thick. Really recommend you check your case's compatibility. Compatibility can be a concern depending on your specific case, so make sure you double check the specifications of your case. Now, if you're going to side mount and want to use these same exact fans, you are going to have to unscrew each one of these and flip them over so that they're sent to intake cold air. However, if you're like me and want to use these fans in a push-pull configuration with your own style fan, so these are the SL Infinity reverse blades to match the aesthetics of your overall case, then you want to position these fans behind the actual radiator, which will be the fans to push, and the SL Infinity reverse will be the ones to pull in that cold air. So the first thing we're going to do here is unscrew each one of these. Now that we have all the screws out, on the bottom right corner, you want to remove the addressable RGB and the PWM connector. So that allows us to remove this fan here, which we're going to put to the side. And then you want to basically unplug each one of these as we go, because they're all interconnected to each other. So we are going to have to connect each one of these back. And once again, if you want to use these same fans on the front of the radiator, you are going to have to flip them over so that they're set to intake, and they will basically go like this. I would probably recommend having the cables on this side, so that way you can connect them again seamlessly. Now that those out, you can grab your favorite set of fans that match your aesthetics of your case. In this case, I'll be using the reverse blade SL Infinity fans, which are set to intake. Now I want to make sure that the connector that's used to connect the power and the RGB is located opposite to where the tubes are, because as you can see, the tubes are definitely going to block that. So I want to make sure that that connector is on the left side, opposite of where the tubes end. And then I can go ahead and reuse the same screws and screw in the SL Infinities. Now keep in mind that since we are doing a push-pull, you are going to need another set of radiator screw fans. So using the same white screws, I'm going to screw in the SL Infinity fans. All right, so the SL Infinities are now screwed on the Arctic Freezer 3. And these fans we're going to leave separately because we have to screw these in alongside the side bracket. All right, so here's the Y70 Touch Infinite case. And as you can see here, this case has the side bracket integrated in the case, so I can't really remove this. So it does make it a little bit more challenging to do a push-pull that way, and the room that we have to actually install it. But make sure you follow the directions of your case, of course. But because this thing is so massive, I can't even put the AIO like straight on. I would have to kind of tilt it in. This LN60 noodle makes it even more difficult. Keep in mind that I have these fans on a lower level, so if I want to put tubes on top, it's not going to work with the fans on a lower level. So in my scenario, I would have to do it like this with the tubes on bottom, which is actually more preferable than tubes on top. Now keep in mind that if you want to do tubes on top, you might end up having to install the actual pump with these tubes on top. Keep in mind that when you put the cover on in this orientation, the actual logo will be upside down, which you could remove and kind of flip it. But the direction of the VRM fan will be blowing the opposite direction instead of the actual VRMs on your motherboard. So just keep that in mind. So the first thing, I'm going to put the pump inside the case and then position it, making sure I don't touch the LM60. I'm going to lift this up, make sure I don't touch the cable from the bottom. Hey, there we go. As long as you're cautious and take your time, you shouldn't run into any type of issues. But just to show you guys how it would look like if you just decided to a simpler side mount without doing a push-pull, all you would have to use are these tiny screws with a washer, and then you screw it directly to your bracket. But since we are going to do that push-pull, of course, the smallest screws are not going to be enough. Now, depending on your case and where your bracket is, sometimes you won't be able to attach the fan in top of the bracket, because once we close the back of the case, it's not going to be able to close. So in this case, I would have to position the fan behind the bracket so I can screw it in. But again, it's going to depend on your case, of course, and how much space you actually have to, one, accommodate the thickness of this radiator, and also if it allows for a push-pull. I'm just going to position all these cables to the right side. All right, so I got that fan squeezed in, and next we're going to grab additional screws here. And again, this is the number 632 UNC 34 millimeters, and the corner piece for that screw is going to be right over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to slowly position the fan up. I'm going to pass the screw across the fan, and then slowly move my way up and kind of push the radiator against the fan and start screwing it in just a little bit so I can have space to now move the corner of this fan. And then I'm gonna attack the opposite corner and then screw all the rest in. First fan connected, and it's probably gonna be easier if you're going to connect the connectors first, because once you start introducing the other fans, the connecting these become a little bit more chaotic since you have a lot of these all over the place. So I'm going to quickly start connecting it. So just locate where the bottom connectors are, and of course we have the three-way PWM split, and then we have the adjustable RGB connector, and on this side we have all the connectors for the bottom fan. We have a male end of the adjustable RGB, so we know that this is going to connect to a secondary fan, and this female adjustable RGB, we're going to hook that up on the actual bottom. So this is going to start the chain, and then this PWM all the way down there, we're going to connect that with this PWM right here. It's really hard to see, but that PWM connected right there. And hopefully you have enough space to do all of this, but it could be very complicated. All right, so PWM and RGB are now connected. And just to show you real quick how it looks like on the side, this is one of the reasons why I made sure that all the connectors are located that way. So that way we're not seeing all the connectors. Of course, it'd be way easier if they're all the way here, because it gives me a lot of space to move. But these are the sacrifices that we have to make if you want to utilize those same fans. I will say that if you're going to start connecting the other fans, I'm going to have to loosen the bottom fan. That way I can easily pass this through. If I were using different set of fans that were, let's say, daisy chainable, then it'd be a little bit easier and simpler. Alright, second fan is in, but this time I did not screw them all the way in, so that way I can attach the last fan. But I'm going to rotate the case again. So we should have a male end and a female adjustable RGB from the second fan. And real quick, we're going to start connecting the female and the male end from the bottom of the fan to the second fan. That's connected. And that should leave a final male end to connect the third fan, which is going to be up there. And then the second PWM is tucked right here in this corner, so I'm just going to pull it in front of me. and then take the middle end of the PWM and connect them together. And so that should leave you with one last male end of the PWM and one last male end of the addressable RGB, so we can make sure that we have the RGB of the back all connected, which, you know, we're not going to really see it from the back, but I figured I definitely want to see how the RGB looks on this fan, so why not daisy chain them when you have the chance to. All right, final fan. Remember, I loosened up all the screws are loosened up, none of them are tight yet, and that's going to allow the fan to be able to be pushed all the way in. Now this time I can start screwing in all of these screws, and the final ones should line up. So I'm gonna do that real quick. All right, and they're all screwed in very securely, and I'm gonna show you what the side looks like. So this is how the side is looking here. No wires on this side, which is awesome. And then we're gonna connect our last PWM and ARGB. So go ahead and locate that. Should be right in this corner right over here. I don't know if you can see that, but right here we have our last female adjustable RGB and PWM, and we're going to grab the two male ends and we're just going to connect them real quick. But I'm going to do this behind, maybe might be off camera because it's a little bit difficult for me to do this. All right, did the adjustable RGB, and then the final one is the PWM. Now all of these are connected now, and we can start tucking these cables all the way in. And since they're on this side, you're not really going to notice them, so they're not going to look as pretty as how they were first installed because they were on the other side. But you shouldn't notice it as much, especially since the 5090 that I have is such a thick card. It'll definitely hide all of these wirings here, so I'm just going to leave it that way. So now we can go ahead and lay down the case. All right, before we can attach the pump on top of the CPU, I'm going to first put this on the side real quick. We're going to have to first install our brackets. And if you're using an AMD processor like I am, you're going to have to use this AMD kit here, which comes with a right and left bracket with screws and standoffs, so you can install this bracket. But first, if this is your first time attaching an AIO, you might see these two original pieces that come with your motherboard. Or if you have a completely different cooler or AIO, then you're obviously going to have to remove that. So in this case, these are the original pieces that came with the motherboard. So we take a Phillips head and we unscrew all 4 screws. All right, so with those 4 screws removed, we're now able to remove these 2 pieces here. Make sure you save these and the screws just in case you ever need them in the future. All right, next up, we're going to grab these standoffs that came in that AMD packet, and we're going to put it over the 4 original screw holes. Grab one of the brackets. In this case, this is the right side. My recommendation to make this as easy as possible is to just put a screw over it and have your screwdriver already ready, because these standoffs do not get knocked off very easily. And then you're able to just position that over the first screw, holding the bracket as well. Now that we have our bracket completely installed, next step is to attach thermal paste, because the Arctic liquid freezer does not have it installed on the actual cold plate. But thankfully include a tube of MX6. That's exactly what we're going to do. Now MX6 has a very high viscosity, so it's a very thick paste, and they recommend on AMD processors to do either a pea-sized amount or a letter X, and the pressure of the plate should spread everything out very evenly. So I'm going to go ahead and do a nice little X. And once you're done, go ahead and cap it off. And right before we attach it on the CPU, make sure you remove this plastic piece, because if you don't, it is definitely going to make your CPU very, very hot, and you definitely don't want that. Now we can start positioning it over the actual brackets. Now keep in mind that this pump does have compatibility issues with certain motherboards, like ASUS ROG motherboards, because of the M.2 heatsink being a little bit too high. That could potentially run into this portion of it, because this has an offset. As you can see, the offset is positioned more downward, so that's the reason why certain motherboards might have compatibility issues. So I recommend checking that as well. But to install this, we have 2 screws here. And full disclaimer here, if this is your first time attaching an AIO or your first time with a liquid freezer AIO like this one, it is very hard. It's not the easiest to install, but my recommendation is to make sure you have a bit that fits the actual screw perfectly and is not too loose. And the next thing I recommend is you want to position this over the 2 screw holes, and then with your left hand I recommend just holding downward pressure on the center. Start with the left side, making sure that you have full contact. Now once you have most of it in, you should be able to let go of the opposite hand. Now if you notice one side is not all the way in, then go ahead and unscrew it and then go ahead and try it again. But this time try the left side and make sure that it's all the way in. So I'm still going to hold it on though, but I'm going to go ahead and tighten it all the way, little by little. So keep in mind that we do have the offset on the AMD because most of the hotspot is located on the bottom of the CPU, which is why Arctic went with an offset. That's why you see the top of this exposed a little bit. Another thing to note here is that because of the bottom offsets, removing your M.2 becomes very difficult now, because now if I want to remove the M.2, I will have to actually unscrew it, take it off, so that way I can have access to my M.2. That's just one of the downsides of that offset, so just keep that in mind. Make sure you have your M.2 already installed. All right, so next step here, let's go ahead and peel this off. So once again, it's up to you which connector you want to use. If you want to keep it very simple, you can use the all-in-one connector, which connects on the right side of the pump. You can attach this portion on a dedicated AIO pump, or if your motherboard doesn't have a dedicated AIO pump, you can connect this directly to CPU fan or CPU optional. However, since I want control of all 3 individual aspects of this radiator, I want to be able to control the actual fans, the pump, and the VRM separately, then you want to use this connector instead. Now, I probably should have connected this beforehand, but I'm going to show you a snippet of how it looks like connecting this connector. So go ahead and locate this tab here, and it should connect right over here. All right, now that we have that connector in, let's go ahead and grab the VRM fan front piece here. And of course, we have the 2 magnets that should line up perfectly with the magnets on the actual pump. That way I can get an idea how the cables actually look. All right, so when it comes to connectors, we should have a total of 4 connectors if you're using the 3 splitter, or you have just 2 simple connectors if you're using the all-in-one. So I'm going to start with the addressable RGB, which again controls the RGB of this. Portion in to an open addressable RGB on your motherboard. All right, so our adjustable RGB is in, and then for these connectors here, this one over here is labeled pump. You want to connect this to your pump header on your motherboard. In this case, in this motherboard, I have a dedicated fan pump on the right side of the motherboard, or I could use the CPU fan or CPU optional. Since we have 3 connectors, I just want to simplify it and connect them all on the top. So what I'm going to do here is that for the pump, I'm going to connect this to where it says CPU fan. So that's going to be on the middle. And then VRM, I'm going to put it under the CPU optional. And then finally for the actual fan, I'm going to put it on the system fan 4. And again, that's specific on my motherboard. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I want the CPU fan to be read as the AIO pump, and then the fans on the back of the radiator to be read as system chassis 4. So let's go ahead and plug that in and go ahead and tuck these cables just to improve the actual aesthetics. And let's not forget about this piece up there. All right, now that we have that done, our AIO is now installed. All right, so here's how we're looking with the AORUS Master 5090. Everything fit perfectly. Everything's connected. I do want to show you what I did with the tubes here real quick. Now, these tubes are very stiff. So to ensure that the tubes aren't poked out, kind of rubbing against the GPU, thankfully this Y70 Touch has like a bottom portion. So I kind of just push the tubes inside the bottom. That way everything would fit perfectly, and I don't have to worry about the tubes kind of pushing the GPU, especially since this is such a thick GPU. Now I'm gonna go ahead and connect the Strimer, power everything up, and go ahead and test out exactly how this Pro version performs. I'm gonna go ahead and power it on so you guys can hear exactly how everything sounds like when you first boot it up. You should hear some liquids, that's perfectly fine. So let's go ahead and power it on. 3, 2, 1. Back fans. of course, since I reinstalled an AIO, everything's going to go through training and it's going to have to detect a new CPU. But once everything is set up, I'm going to go ahead and run some tests and let you know exactly how to control the curves of this AIO. So there's two ways that you can control the fan curves of the VRM and the fans on the back of the Freezer Pro. So the first step is booting up into your motherboard BIOS by grabbing the keyboard. You power on your PC. As it's loaded, you can go ahead and spam the delete key. Keep in mind that I'm using the Pro Ice, and this could look completely different depending on which motherboard you have and the brand that you have, of course. Now, starting from the main screen here, try to look for the section that has anything that mentions fan. In the case of the AORUS, we have Smart Fan 6, so that's what it's going to allow us to adjust any type of fan curves. But you can see right off the bat here that CPU fan and CPU optional are both being read with RPM signals, as you can see there. CPU fan being the actual pump, because that's where we connected the pump into, and then CPU optional is the VRM. Of course, it's all going to depend on where exactly you connected it on your motherboard's headers. So if I click on Smart Fan 6, we have all the fans here that can be detected by the motherboard. And as you can see here, the first option is CPU fan, which is controlling the pump right now. And this is the curve set by the BIOS, and I have a lot of controls. There's different presets where I can adjust it manually. Since this is the pump itself, I personally like having it high, so that the pump is running close to maximum. And again, this is BIOS, and I will show you guys how to do it when you're actually in the software. And depending on your motherboard, you might even have an option to tune, so you can tune each of these individually as well. So now, as long as you're using the 3 separate connectors, CPU optional, which we said earlier, is controlling the actual VRM fan, so it's the internal fan inside the pump. I can also individually set whatever curve I want, if I want it manual or whatever I want to do. And the great thing about this is that under CPU optional, I have the option to have this particular VRM fan actually detect which temperature out of these options. So for example, I have VRM, and because the VRM fan is responsible for cooling the VRM headers of the motherboard, then I can simply just have this curve to match the temperatures of the VRM. And as you can see, the RPM over here. So I can definitely do that, and I can go ahead and hit save, for example, and have it reserved in the BIOS, and that's saved, for example. And then finally, System Fan 4, because again, on our motherboard, all on the right header is where I connected the fan into System Fan 4, and I have already adjusted the curves here because I personally set it to manual with a way lower curve here, because I don't want these fans to kick over like 2000 RPM, especially during a boot up. So I personally like to keep the slopes very down, because these fans are very high performance and you don't really need to have them spinning so fast. So whenever you're satisfied with the profile, you can go ahead and, you know, save each one, and that should save the next time you actually boot it up. So whenever you're done, you can go ahead and save and exit, and you'll see here that the CPU fan speed control and the CPU optional, I changed them from normal to manual, and we can hit yes, and that will automatically save up. All right, so the second way to control the fan curves would be using your motherboard software. Now, there might be third-party software to control fan curves. However, I've always used the motherboard, and it's what I personally preferred. So again, this is going to depend on which brand motherboard you have, but because I have the AORUS Pro Ice, I would have to use the Gigabyte control sensor, so I can go ahead and customize the fan curves within the actual software. So right over here, it'll detect any other Gigabyte or AORUS products. But over here, this is the motherboard here. I'll just click on RGB Fusion. We'll cover that after this one. But over here under fan control is where we can customize all of the curves here. So there are some presets here: silent, normal, full speed, or manual. I prefer using manual and set my own curves. So the first fan here from the drop down is CPU, which, like we said earlier, is going to control the actual pump speeds. Monitoring point over here, which of course CPU fan is always going to be locked to just the CPU. And this is the fan curve that I have it under. And then when I go down to CPU optional, which is going to be the VRM fan, same thing here. I can go ahead and change the monitoring point. As you can see, I have more options, and I have this specific VRM fan tied to the temperature of the VRM, which is right over here. So as you can see here, the motherboard is reading at 39 degrees Celsius. But the hotter the VRM gets, then I want the VRM fan to kick up as high as possible. Of course, right now, this is the RPM of that VRM fan. Finally, we have System 4, which is going to be the fans on the back of the radiator, which is where I put it to be the push in the push-pull configuration. Now this one, of course, I have it set up to monitor the CPU temperature. So as the CPU rises, I want the fans to rise. But because these fans are very powerful, I set the curves to be very, very low and only kick up to kind of overdrive if it starts reaching closer to 80 degrees. And again, this is my own personal preference. It's what keeps the noise levels down, and I have the same type of curve spread across all my fans over here. Now, if you guys want to hear how the fans actually sound from this position, for example, I'm going to go ahead and click on stereo mode real quick, and I'm going to increase the fans to, let's say, 50%, and hit apply. At 50%, we're looking at about 1744 RPM, and this is where the sound of the fans become audible. And then I'm going to rev it up all the way up to 100% because these fans go they can spin very fast. So I'm going to hit apply here, and then you can hear exactly how these fans sound at 100%. So these fans can spin a little bit over 3000 RPM, which is crazy. And so my recommendation for these type of fans is to set the curves as low as possible. Let me go back to slope mode here, hit apply. And now that we cover the fan curves, next thing we're going to cover up how to control the RGB elements of that VRM fan and also the fans on the radiator itself as well. Now, I personally use the motherboard software again. Now, you could use third-party software like Signal RGB to sync up all of your other devices, but again, I personally like to use the motherboard software. So within the motherboard software, you want to look for any type of RGB control. So over here, I have my motherboard where the sync is on. So anything that's connected to the motherboard, such as the AORUS letters, the VRM, the CPU fan, I want them all to just basically sync together. So right now we have a white color. So if I want to easily change it, I can go ahead and let's say choose a red color, and you can see that the letters of the motherboard, the VRM fan, and even behind the radiator, they also change in unison, and I can go ahead and select different colors. And I can also, depending on the motherboard software, of course, use different type of effects here. So this is all going to depend on which software you use. Of course, something like a Signal RGB might have even more effects. All right, so I just benchmarked using Cinebench 2024 and using the multi-core score. This is the performance that I got with the Arctic freezer. We have a maximum temperature readout of 74.6 throughout the whole test, and we had a multi-core score of 1873. Now that's with running all the fans on quiets with the slope line that I originally showed. So the fans did not spin more than 1,300 RPMs the whole time that test was running. Now I did the same exact test, same multi-core test, but this time I revved up the RPM. So I used this slope here so that whenever the temperature was over 55 degrees, it's gonna be at 100%. So 3,000 RPM, and also adjusting the fan curves of all the other fans to be the highest speeds, of course, with the case closed down. Of course, I'm just taking it off to prevent the glare. But in this case, 2143, which as you can see is a lot higher than the original one that we got. And with the fan spinning at 100%, you can see that the maximum temperature now reads out at 71.6 degrees Celsius, which is a 3-degree difference in temperatures when you have the fan spinning at 100%, which is obviously why we got a higher score, because the cooler the CPU is throughout the majority of the test, of course, is going to perform even higher. So with all that said, guys, I think the Arctic Pro series is a great AIO, especially considering the price. The MSRP of the Pro version, the white a-RGB, is $150, and especially around the time where a lot of components are increasing in price, they're trying their very best to lower the price as much as possible. So I do appreciate Arctic for trying to keep the price as low as possible, which is great. Whether or not the Pro version is the one for you, it's going to depend on whether or not you're going to be using the Pro fans. If you're going to use your own fans, you're not going to do a push-pull, let's say you're going to use your own fans, then I honestly recommend just sticking to the non-Pro version, since the performance is practically going to be almost the same. However, if you are planning on using the actual fans with the Pro version, and this becomes an even greater choice, unless if you really want the extra silver trim around this over here, then again, that's completely up to you, of course. Now, I do wish that Arctic would have made adjustments to the AMD brackets
because they are very hard, just like the non-pro version. After installing it several times, you kind of get the hang of it. However, for first timers, it can prove to be very difficult. So I kind of wish they kind of made the bracket easier to install. I can't say the same thing for the Intel bracket because I don't have an Intel CPU to really try it out. Now I do know that Arctic has done internal testings on Intel CPUs and they have seen a 5 to 7 degree drop using this particular contact frame. However, on my case, from what I've seen so far, comparing it with another AIO that I have used prior, I have seen lower temps by about 2 degrees, and considering the fact that this AIO is almost half the price as the previous AIO, I will say that this is great for those that are looking for great performance without having to pay so much. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this tutorial of how to side mount and install the Arctic Liquid Freezer 3 Pro. If you have the non-pro version, then the steps should be very similar since they share the same type of AMD bracket as well. I want to give a huge shout out to Arctic for also sending this awesome AIO out so I can make this video for you guys. And I really appreciate each and every one of you guys that stay and watch my videos, so I really appreciate it, guys. Make sure you guys subscribe to keep up with my next video. Firewolf out.